Hey, Reddit. I never thought I'd be the guy sharing his life on here, but I guess life has a way of blindsiding you. I'm Brad, 49, and I've been married to my wife Marie for over 2 decades. We've been through a lot, raising our daughter, building our life, handling the ups and downs like any married couple. I thought we were solid. If someone asked me a year ago, I'd have said Marie and I were rock solid. But now, I'm questioning everything. It started small, little changes in her behavior that I didn't want to see as red flags. She'd suddenly taken an interest in working out, revamped her wardrobe, and started working late more often. I'd joke about her new health kick and ask her to join me on walks, but she always said she preferred the gym or yoga. The working late thing, I brushed off because she's in finance, and deadlines can be brutal. Then there was her phone, constantly buzzing, always turned face down. I'm not the snooping type. After 25 years, I figured we'd earned trust. But the little things kept piling up. Her tone got sharper when I asked about her day. She was distant even when we were sitting on the couch together. And then came the cabin. We have this old family cabin a couple of hours away. We don't use it much anymore, just the occasional weekend if our daughter, now in college, was home and we wanted some quiet family time. Last month, I stopped by to check on it after a storm, and things didn't add up. First, the lock had been changed. I had a spare key, but it didn't fit. When I finally got in, I found fresh footprints in the snow leading to the porch, definitely not mine. Inside, the place didn't feel like it had been sitting and used. There was a faint smell of cologne, a mug in the sink, and what looked like recently laundered sheets on the bed. Then I opened a drawer in the bedroom. That's where I found it, a set of lingerie that Marie had worn only once before, on our 25th anniversary. This wasn't mine to find, though. Beside it was a small box of condoms. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. My gut told me to keep digging. Hidden behind some cleaning supplies was a small camera. When I connected it to my laptop at home, I found videos. One of them was of Marie, with another man. The guy looked like something out of a fitness ad, young, ripped, everything I'm not anymore. He was wearing nothing but a smug grin. She wore the same lingerie I'd bought her. That's when my heart stopped. Everything I thought we had was gone in an instant. I haven't confronted her yet. I feel like I'm walking around in someone else's life, waiting to wake up. Every time I look at her now, it's like I'm staring at a stranger. She doesn't know what I found, or at least I think she doesn't. I'm trying to hold it together for our daughter. But honestly, I'm shattered. I'll share more later, but I just needed to get this out. How do you even begin to deal with something like this? After finding the videos, everything changed. I couldn't unsee it. Marie would walk into the room, ask if I wanted coffee, or talk about her day, and all I could do was nod or mumble. Every smile she gave me felt fake, like a mask hiding the lies beneath. I started paying closer attention to her behavior, not because I wanted to catch her in the act, but because I needed to understand how long this had been going on. It was like I was seeing her for the first time, every little action now suspicious. She'd laugh at something on her phone and tilt the screen away when I glanced over. She started going out more, always with vague explanations. Just meeting the girls, or it's a work dinner. She'd text in the middle of the night, claiming it was a coworker asking about some report. The worst part? She wasn't even that careful. One evening, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the counter. Normally, I'd never look, but this time, I did. The message was from someone named David. It wasn't even subtle. Miss you already. Can't wait for next time. I didn't even have the strength to scroll further. My hands were shaking. I locked her phone and placed it back exactly where I found it. That night, we ate dinner together like nothing was wrong. She was cheerful, talking about a new fitness class she wanted to try. I just nodded, forcing myself to chew and swallow while my stomach churned. I decided I needed more proof, something irrefutable. Maybe it's dumb, but a part of me wanted to be wrong. What if I was jumping to conclusions? What if I misunderstood everything? So, I started digging. I checked the bank statements and credit card bills. Gym memberships, hotel charges, expensive dinners in places we'd never been together. And then there was the cabin. I hadn't changed the lock after my last visit. It felt like a thread I needed to pull, so I went back one evening. This time, I parked a mile away and walked through the woods to avoid being seen. Sure enough, there was a car parked outside, a shiny black SUV that didn't belong to either of us. I recognized it from the videos. Through the window, I saw them. Marie and David. Laughing, drinking wine, completely at ease. My wife, who once couldn't even look at another man without blushing, was curled up on the couch with him like it was their home, not ours. I wanted to burst through the door and scream, but I didn't. I just stood there in the cold, watching my life crumble through a fogged-up window. When I finally left, I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Sadness? Humiliation? All of it hit me at once. I drove home, parked in the driveway, and sat in the car for hours, trying to figure out what to do. When Marie got home that night, she kissed me on the cheek like always and said, "Work was crazy today." I smiled back, my face stiff with effort, and said, "I bet it was." I don't know how long I can keep this up, the weight of what I knew was unbearable. Every day felt like a performance, pretending everything was fine while screaming internally. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and every moment with Marie felt like some twisted charade. But keeping quiet wasn't just about self-preservation, it was about figuring out my next move. I needed to know what I was dealing with, not just emotionally but practically. Our lives were so intertwined, our home, our finances, our daughter. If I blew this up, it would scorch everything. So I played my role, the loving husband, the clueless fool. One evening, as Marie was out working late, I called up an old buddy, Jeff. We hadn't talked much since college, life just got in the way, but he's a private investigator now. I told him everything. "Well, damn, Brad," Jeff said after I finished. "You sure about this?" I wish I wasn't. Jeff didn't sugarcoat things. He told me it would take time to gather evidence and advised me to stay calm until then. He even offered to come by the cabin with me to set up some cameras, but I told him I'd handle it. This was my mess to deal with. The cameras were easy enough to install, small, discreet, motion-activated. I felt sick doing it, but I needed the truth laid bare. If Marie was going to lie to my face, I wanted her lies caught on tape. Days turned into weeks. Marie was still working late and heading to her gym classes, but she started acting strange around me. Like she could sense something had shifted. One night, as we were watching TV, she turned to me and said, "You've been really quiet lately. Is everything okay?" I wanted to laugh. Okay? How could anything be okay? But I just said, "Yeah, just work stress." She gave me a long look, then smiled. "You know you can talk to me, right?" That almost broke me. The sheer audacity of it, the woman sneaking off to our cabin with another man, sitting here pretending she cared. But I nodded and gave her a weak smile. The first crack came the following week. Jeff called me and said, "Brad, I've got something. It's not pretty." Apparently, Marie and David had a little routine. He'd pick her up a block away from her gym, and they'd head to the cabin. Jeff had pictures of them kissing, holding hands, and walking into the cabin together. He also pulled a background check on David. Turns out, he's 27, single, and a personal trainer. Figures. "I've got enough to confirm what you suspected," Jeff said. "But if you want to hit her with hard evidence, give me a little more time." "Do it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The anger was boiling over now. I couldn't look at her without imagining all the lies she'd told, all the ways she'd humiliated me. But I kept quiet. For now. The confrontation was coming, I just didn't know when. I don't know how I made it through the next few weeks without snapping. Every smile Marie gave me felt like a slap in the face. Every "love you" before bed felt hollow, like an echo of something long gone. Jeff kept updating me, and every report made it harder to breathe. They weren't just meeting at the cabin, they were going on dates too. Fancy dinners, weekend trips, and even a shopping spree where he bought her lingerie. The same kind I'd found at the cabin. The evidence was piling up, but it wasn't enough for me. I needed more. Maybe it was my pride, maybe it was denial, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her yet. Then, something happened that threw everything into chaos. Our daughter, Amy, came home for the weekend. She's in her second year of college, bright and full of energy, the kind of kid who can light up a room just by walking in. Marie acted normal around her, but I could tell she was on edge. She kept checking her phone, stepping outside to take work calls. Amy noticed. "Dad, is Mom okay?" she asked me late one night after Marie had gone to bed. "Why do you ask?" I said, trying to sound casual. "She's been acting weird. Distracted. And she's been on her phone a lot lately. I don't know. It's not like her." Hearing that from Amy hit me like a ton of bricks. I wanted to tell her everything, but how could I? She adores her mom. I couldn't be the one to shatter her world. She's just busy with work, sweetie, I said, forcing a smile. You know how she gets when there's a big project. Amy nodded, but she didn't look convinced. The next day, I checked the footage from the cabin cameras. Marie had been there the night before with David, while Amy and I sat at home thinking she was working late. They were laughing, drinking wine, and eventually, you can guess the rest. It was like a knife to the gut. She didn't even try to cover her tracks anymore. That night, I couldn't hold back. As Marie came to bed, I blurted out, "How was work?" She hesitated. "It was fine." "Why?" "Just curious," I said, my voice tight. "Seemed like you had a lot of late nights lately." She stared at me for a moment, then smiled. "You know how it is." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yeah, I do." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear maybe, or guilt. But she didn't say anything. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, knowing I couldn't keep this up much longer. The lies, the pretending, it was eating me alive. The confrontation was coming. It had to. I just didn't know if I was ready for it. It happened on a Tuesday. I came home early from work, my mind racing after Jeff sent me the final pieces of evidence. There was no room for doubt anymore. Photos, timestamps, bank records, it was all there, staring me in the face like a neon sign flashing betrayal. Marie was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I walked in, surprised. "You're home early," she said with that familiar smile. The one I used to love. I set my bag down on the counter and met her eyes. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" I gestured toward the table. "Sit." She hesitated, glancing at her phone like it might save her, but then she sat down. I pulled out a folder from my bag and placed it on the table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice shaky now. "Open it." Her hands trembled as she opened the folder and started flipping through the contents. Photos of her and David at the cabin, receipts for hotels and dinners, a screenshot of the text message from her phone that night in the shower. Her face went pale. "Brad, I can explain." "Don't." My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. "Don't insult me with excuses." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. "Not this time." "How long?" I asked. "Brad, please." "How long?" She swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. "About a year." "A year." 12 months of lies. 12 months of betrayal. My chest felt like it was caving in, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Why?" I asked, my voice quieter now. She started crying. "I don't know. I wasn't happy, and he made me feel alive again. I never meant for it to go this far." I stared at her, my mind spinning. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? You brought him to our cabin, Marie. The place we built together. The place we celebrated us. You wore the lingerie I bought you for our anniversary. For him." Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't stop. "You lied to me, to Amy, to yourself. You destroyed everything we built. And for what? A fling? Some guy who'll never love you the way I did." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I'm sorry, Brad. I am so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this." I stood up, my hands shaking. "I don't even know who you are anymore." I walked out of the room, leaving her there with the evidence of her betrayal spread out before her. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like her husband. I felt like a stranger walking out of a house that no longer felt like home. After the confrontation, I didn't know what to do with myself. I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring through the windshield. My mind kept replaying the conversation, her tears, her excuses. I wanted to feel anger, but all I felt was hollow. When I finally returned home, the house was dark except for the faint glow from the living room. Marie was still there, sitting on the couch with her knees pulled to her chest. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and swollen. "Brad," she said softly, standing up like she wanted to approach me. I held up a hand. "Don't." She froze, her face crumpling as I walked past her and up the stairs to our bedroom. I locked the door behind me. The next morning, Marie was waiting for me in the kitchen. She hadn't slept, I could see it in her face. Neither had I. "We need to talk about this," she said as I poured myself a cup of coffee. Talk. I repeated, setting the mug down harder than I intended. About what? How you lied to me for a year. How you brought him to our cabin. Or maybe you'd like to discuss how you plan to keep all this from me forever. She flinched, but I didn't care. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she said, her voice trembling. But I want to fix this. I want us to work through this, Brad. I let out a bitter laugh. Work through this? You destroyed us, Marie. You don't just come back from something like this. I made a mistake, she pleaded. A terrible mistake, but I still love you. Love. I stared at her, my chest tightening. You don't destroy the people you love. Her tears started again, but I couldn't stand to watch. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Where are you going? She called after me. Anywhere but here, I said, slamming the door behind me. I spent the day at Jeff's office, trying to figure out my next steps. Divorce? Separation? Could I even afford to uproot my life like that? Take your time, Jeff said, handing me a beer. Don't let her push you into anything. You call the shots now. But the truth was, I felt like I had no control at all. I didn't want to leave my home or disrupt Amy's life. At the same time, I couldn't imagine staying under the same roof as Marie, pretending everything was fine. When I got back home that evening, Amy was there. Hey Dad, she said, her face lighting up before faltering. Is everything okay? You and Mom seem off. I couldn't lie to her. Not anymore. We're going through something, sweetheart, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I'm here for you. Always. She nodded, though she looked worried. I'm here for you too, Dad. Her words hit me harder than I expected. At least I hadn't lost her, not yet. But I knew I couldn't keep her in the dark forever. Marie and I needed to have the hardest conversation of all. How to tell our daughter that the life she thought was solid had crumbled. The hardest part about all of this wasn't Marie's betrayal. It wasn't the lies or even the humiliation. It was knowing that Amy, our daughter, was going to have her world shattered just like mine. I put off the conversation for as long as I could. Marie and I barely spoke to each other unless Amy was around. Every meal felt like a minefield, with fake smiles and shallow conversation. I could see Amy watching us, sensing something was wrong. The night finally came when there was no avoiding it. Marie and I sat across from each other in the kitchen, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. We need to tell her, I said, breaking the silence. Marie nodded, her hands trembling around her mug. I know. But we need to do it together. She needs to hear it from both of us. Hearing her say together made my stomach turn, but she was right. Amy deserved the truth. Well, part of it, anyway. When Amy came home from her part-time job that evening, we asked her to sit down. She looked at us, confused, but didn't ask questions. What's going on? She asked, her eyes darting between us. Marie started to speak, but her voice cracked. She looked at me helplessly. I sighed, bracing myself. Amy, I said, your mom and I are having some serious problems in our marriage. Her face fell. What kind of problems? I hesitated, glancing at Marie. She was staring at the floor, tears silently streaming down her face. Things haven't been right for a while, I said carefully. And, we're not sure if we can work through it. Amy's eyes filled with tears. Are you getting a divorce? Marie finally found her voice. We don't know yet, sweetie. But no matter what happens, we both love you more than anything. That will never change. Amy stared at her, then at me. What happened? Did one of you do something? My heart sank. I couldn't tell her everything. Not now, not like this. It's complicated, I said. Just know that none of this is your fault, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure you're okay. Amy wiped her eyes, her voice shaking. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I could tell something was wrong. I reached out and took her hand. We didn't want to burden you. You've got enough on your plate with school and work. But we're telling you now because you deserve to know. She nodded, sniffling. I don't want you to split up. Marie broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my focus on Amy. We'll figure it out, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. One way or another, we'll get through this. Amy hugged us both before going upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the empty table, while Marie disappeared into the bedroom. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing my family. The morning after we told Amy felt heavier than any I could remember. I woke up to the sound of Marie moving around downstairs, something she usually did quietly. This time, it was loud, like she wanted me to hear her. When I walked into the kitchen, she was packing a bag. "What's this?" I asked, though I could already guess. "I think it's best if I give you some space," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I'll stay at a hotel for a while." For a second, I almost felt relieved. Then she added, "I'll come back once you've had time to think things over." Her words hit a nerve. "Marie, this isn't about me needing space. This is about what you did. Don't act like this is some cooling-off period." She froze, her hand hovering over the zipper of her bag. "What do you want me to do, Brad? Tell me, and I'll do it. I'll quit my job, I'll go to therapy, You'll what? Erase the last year? Make me forget what I saw." My voice was sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. "You can't fix this with promises, Marie. You broke something that doesn't just snap back into place." She finally looked at me, tears brimming in her eyes. "I know I can't undo it, but I'm still here. I still love you." I shook my head, the words sounding hollow. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this in the first place." Her tears spilled over, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. She zipped up her bag and slung it over her shoulder. "I'll stay with my sister," she said softly. "For now." I didn't respond. I just watched as she walked out the door. When Amy came home later that day and saw her mom's car missing, she panicked. "Where's Mom?" she asked, her voice tight. "She's staying with Aunt Rachel for a little while," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. Amy's face crumpled. "So it's really that bad?" "It's complicated," I said, the same empty phrase I'd been repeating to myself all week. "She's not coming back, is she?" I hesitated. "I don't know, Amy. I honestly don't know." Her shoulders sagged, and she looked at me like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Then she went upstairs, leaving me alone with the silence. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. I hadn't blocked Marie yet, but the temptation was there. Part of me wanted to keep the line open, in case she had something meaningful to say. The other part wanted to cut her off completely, to start rebuilding my life without her in it. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a blank document on my laptop and started typing, just pouring everything out. The anger, the heartbreak, the betrayal. Every word felt like a release, but it also made everything more real. When I finally stopped, hours had passed. The house was dark, silent, and cold. I saved the document and closed my laptop, unsure of what came next. All I knew was that the line had been drawn. Marie was out of the house, and there was no going back to the way things were. The weeks that followed were strained, to put it mildly. Marie and I lived in the same house but in separate worlds. I slept on the couch most nights, though a few times I found myself in Amy's room, sitting on the edge of her bed while she talked about her day. She didn't ask many questions about what was happening between me and her mother, but I could see it in her eyes, the worry, the sadness. Marie tried to act normal around Amy. She cooked dinner, asked about her classes, and even suggested a movie night. But Amy wasn't having it. She gave short answers, stayed glued to her phone, and rarely looked up when Marie spoke. One evening, after Marie suggested they go shopping together, Amy snapped. "Why are you even trying, Mom? Like you care now." Marie froze, her face falling. "What's that supposed to mean?" Amy stood up from the couch, her voice rising. "It means you've been acting weird for months, and now all of a sudden you're trying to be supermom? It's fake, and I don't want any part of it." "Amy," I said gently, trying to diffuse the tension. "No, Dad," she said, turning to me. "I'm sick of this. I don't know what's going on between you two, but I'm not stupid. I know it's bad, and it's all her fault, isn't it?" Marie's face crumpled, and she started to cry. "Amy, please. It's not that simple." "Yeah, it is," Amy shot back. "You messed up. And now you're trying to act like everything's fine, but it's not." Before I could say anything, Amy stormed upstairs, slamming her door behind her. Marie sank onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. I stood there, torn between anger and guilt. I hated seeing Amy so upset, but I couldn't blame her. She was caught in the middle of a mess she didn't create, and it was taking its toll. "I'm losing her," Marie whispered, her voice broken. I didn't respond. What could I say? That night, I went to Amy's room. I knocked softly before opening the door. She was lying on her bed, her face buried in her pillow. "Can we talk?" I asked. She sat up, wiping her eyes. "What's the point, Dad? Everything's ruined." I sat down beside her. "I know it feels that way right now, but we'll get through this. I promise." She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Do you hate her?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a moment before answering. "I'm angry at her, Amy. Really angry. But hate? No. She's still your mom, and she loves you more than anything." Amy nodded, but she didn't look convinced. "I just don't understand why she would do this to us." "Neither do I admitted. "But this isn't your burden to carry, okay? None of this is your fault." She leaned into me, and I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close. As I sat there comforting my daughter, I realized that no matter how much anger or hurt I felt, my priority had to be her. If nothing else, I had to make sure she came out of this with her heart intact. Marie and I might have been broken beyond repair, but I wouldn't let that destroy Amy too. It was bound to happen eventually. I needed to confront him. David. The man who turned my world upside down. I'd been avoiding it, convincing myself it wasn't worth the effort. But after Amy's outburst and Marie's continued attempts to prove herself, I felt a fire inside me that I couldn't extinguish. I needed answers, closure, something. So, I found him. It wasn't hard. Jeff had already dug up his address. He lived in a modern apartment complex downtown, the kind of place you'd expect a personal trainer with too much ego and not enough income to live. I drove there on a Saturday afternoon. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles turned white. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I had to see him. When I arrived, I parked and sat in the car for a while, staring at the sleek building. Part of me wanted to turn around, to just leave and let it be. But then I thought about Marie at the cabin, laughing with him, wearing the lingerie I'd bought her. That image was enough to push me out of the car. I found his unit on the 3rd floor. My heart was pounding as I knocked on the door. It opened a few seconds later, and there he was. David. Tall, muscular, with a smug face that made my blood boil. He looked surprised to see me, but he didn't seem nervous. "Can I help you?" he asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You know who I am," I said, my voice low and steady. His expression didn't change. If anything, he looked amused. "Yeah, I do." I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to grab him by the collar. "We need to talk." He shrugged and stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was exactly what I expected. Minimalist, expensive-looking furniture, workout gear in the corner, and a giant mirror on the wall. He gestured for me to sit, but I stayed standing. "Why her?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. He raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" I clenched my fists. "She's my wife. We've been married for 25 years. We have a family. You had no right." David smirked, leaning back against the counter. "Look, man, I didn't make her do anything she didn't want to do. If she wasn't happy with you, that's not my fault." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stepped closer, my voice shaking with anger. "You don't get to justify this. You don't get to pretend you're innocent. She came to me," he said, crossing his arms. "She wanted this. And if you think otherwise, maybe you should take a look at your own marriage. Clearly, it wasn't as perfect as you thought." I stared at him, my blood boiling. "You're a coward," I said finally. "You preyed on a married woman because it was easy, because it fed your ego. But you don't know a damn thing about love or loyalty." David's smirk faltered for the first time, but he didn't respond. I turned and walked out before I did something I'd regret. As I drove away, my chest heaving with anger, I realized that confronting him hadn't given me the closure I'd hoped for. But it had given me something else: clarity. David wasn't worth my time or my energy. My fight wasn't with him anymore. It was with the pieces of my life that he and Marie had shattered. And I was the only one who could decide how to put them back together. After my confrontation with David, I thought I'd feel stronger, more resolved. Instead, I felt drained, like I'd spent every last ounce of energy I had on someone who didn't deserve it. I drove home, not sure what I'd walk into. Marie and I hadn't spoken much since Amy's outburst, and the house felt like a war zone, silent, tense, ready to explode at any moment. When I walked in, Marie was sitting at the dining table, her laptop closed in front of her. She looked up, her face cautious. "Where were you?" "Out," I said curtly, heading toward the stairs. "Wait." Her voice stopped me. "Can we talk?" I sighed, turning back to face her. "What now, Marie?" She stood, her hands fidgeting nervously. "I've been thinking. About everything. About us. And I want to try again." I raised an eyebrow. "Try what, exactly?" "Our marriage," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've broken your trust. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I love you, Brad. I do. And I want to fix this. Fix this." I repeated, my voice bitter. "You think this is something you can just fix with words? After a year of lies? After what you've done to me, to Amy?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I know it sounds impossible, but I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, whatever you need. I'll give you full transparency, no secrets, no excuses. Please, Brad, don't throw this away." I stared at her, my emotions battling inside me. Anger, sadness, exhaustion, they all fought for control. "You threw it away," I said finally, my voice quieter now. "Not me. You." She stepped closer, her tears spilling over. "I was stupid. Selfish. I don't even recognize the person I became, but I want to be better. For you, for Amy, for us. Please, Brad. Don't give up on me." Her words hit something deep inside me, a part of me that still remembered the woman I fell in love with all those years ago. But then I thought about David's smug face, about the cabin, the lingerie, the lies. "How do you expect me to believe you?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You spent a year lying to my face. How do I know this isn't just another performance?" She shook her head, her voice desperate. "Because I'm not lying now. I'll prove it to you, Brad. However long it takes, I'll prove it. Just give me the chance." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her standing there, crying in the dining room. That night, I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Marie's words echoed in my mind, pulling at the part of me that still cared. But the walls I'd built around myself were high, and I wasn't ready to let them down. Not yet. I thought I was handling everything well enough, keeping the tension contained, shielding Amy from the worst of it. But kids aren't blind, and Amy, sharp as ever, finally connected the dots. It happened one evening after dinner. Marie had excused herself to the bedroom, and Amy and I were clearing the table in silence. The quiet had become our norm lately, a kind of unspoken truce to avoid the mess lurking just beneath the surface. But this time, Amy broke it. "Dad," she said, setting a plate on the counter. "What did she do?" The question hit me like a truck. I froze, gripping the edge of the sink. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She crossed her arms, her expression firm. "Don't treat me like a kid, Dad. You and Mom have been weird for months, and now you're barely speaking to each other. I heard you two talking the other night." I sighed, leaning against the counter. "Amy, this is between your mom and me. You don't need to get involved." Her eyes narrowed. "So she did do something." I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "It's complicated." Amy let out a bitter laugh. "That's what she said too. Complicated. Right. Did she cheat on you?" My heart sank. I couldn't lie to her anymore. "Yes." The word hung in the air like a bomb going off. Amy's face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I knew it. I knew something was wrong." "Amy," I said, reaching for her, but she pulled away. "Who?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Who did she cheat with?" "It doesn't matter." "It does to me," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "It matters, Dad. Was it someone we know?" I looked at her, torn. She deserved the truth, but telling her felt like dragging her deeper into the mess. "It's not someone we know well," I said finally. "Just someone from her gym." Amy's hands clenched into fists. "How long?" I swallowed hard. "A year." Her knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. "A whole year. She's been lying to us for a year." I sat down across from her. "Amy, listen to me. None of this is your fault. Your mom and I, we have issues. But she loves you. That hasn't changed." Amy looked up, her face red and tear-streaked. How could she do this to you? To us? I don't know, I admitted. I don't have the answers. But we're going to get through this, okay? You and me. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. I hate her right now. I winced but didn't argue. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. Just, give yourself time to process this. Amy didn't respond, but she stood and headed toward the stairs. I need to be alone, she said quietly. I watched her go, my heart breaking all over again. Marie came downstairs a little while later, her face full of concern. I heard Amy yelling. What happened? She knows, I said, my voice heavy. Marie's face crumpled. What did you tell her? The truth, I said sharply. She asked, and I couldn't lie to her anymore. Marie sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. This is all my fault. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. We both knew the truth of it. That night, the house felt heavier than ever, the silence pressing down like a weight we couldn't lift. The weight of Amy's words stayed with me in the days that followed. She was right, I didn't deserve this, and staying with Marie out of some misguided sense of duty wasn't going to fix anything. But walking away meant tearing apart the life we'd built. It meant accepting that the family I'd spent decades nurturing was never going to look the same. Marie wasn't making it any easier. She seemed to sense that I was slipping further away. She started leaving me notes in the morning, simple things like, have a good day, or thank you for being patient. She'd even begun wearing the necklace I gave her on our 10th anniversary, something she hadn't done in years. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen. Brad, she said, her voice soft, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but can we go to counseling? Just once? If you still want to leave after that, I won't stop you. I stared at her, trying to gauge her sincerity. Counseling isn't going to erase what you did, Marie. It's not going to bring back the trust you destroyed. I know, she said quickly. But maybe it can help us figure out if there's anything left to save. Please, Brad. I'm asking for one session. I wanted to say no. I wanted to walk away and never look back. But something about the way she looked at me, desperate, hopeful, made me pause. Fine, I said after a long silence. One session. The relief on her face was instant, but I didn't feel any. If anything, I felt trapped, like I just agreed to drag out the inevitable. The session was scheduled for the following week. Marie seemed optimistic, but I wasn't. I didn't see how an hour with a therapist could change what had happened. Still, I showed up, sitting stiffly in the small, cozy office while Marie poured out her heart to the counselor. She talked about feeling lost, about craving something new and exciting. She admitted that she'd been selfish, that she'd let her insecurities drive her to make the worst decisions of her life. I never stopped loving Brad, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know. I lost sight of what mattered. The counselor turned to me, her gaze gentle. How does that make you feel, Brad? I hesitated, staring at the floor. It makes me feel like I wasn't enough, I said finally. Like all the years I spent loving her, building a life with her, weren't enough to keep her loyal. Marie started crying, but I didn't look at her. The session ended without much resolution. As we left, Marie reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Don't read into this, I told her. I came because you asked. That's all. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I understand. Thank you for coming. But as I drove home alone, I realized I didn't know if I could keep living in this limbo. A decision was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. The counseling session lingered in my mind for days. It didn't provide the clarity I hoped for, but it cracked something open. I couldn't deny that Marie seemed genuinely remorseful, even desperate to fix what she'd broken. But remorse didn't erase betrayal, and I still couldn't see a way forward. Marie, on the other hand, seemed reinvigorated. She was cooking dinner every night, texting me little updates during the day, even leaving sticky notes on my coffee mug with messages like, "One day at a time," or "Thank you for giving us a chance." I didn't know how to respond. Half of me wanted to believe her, to see her as the woman I married. The other half knew I couldn't ignore what she'd done. Then something happened that forced me to confront my feelings head-on. It was a Saturday morning, and I was cleaning out the garage when Amy came out, holding her phone. "Dad, you need to see this," she said, her voice tense. She handed me the phone, and there it was, a text from Marie to Amy. "I know you're angry with me. I know I've hurt Dad, and I can't undo what I've done. But please don't hate me. I love you more than anything, and I want to fix our family. Please give me a chance. Amy was visibly upset. Why is she putting this on me? I'm not the one who ruined everything. I set the phone down and pulled her into a hug. She's trying, sweetheart. She's just going about it the wrong way. I don't know if I can forgive her, Dad, Amy whispered. You don't have to, I said gently. Not until you're ready. And if you're never ready, that's okay too. Amy nodded, but I could tell she was still struggling. Seeing her pain made my anger at Marie resurface. She wasn't just asking for my forgiveness, she was asking for Amy's too, and putting her in an impossible position. That night, I decided to confront Marie. I found her in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. She looked up when I walked in, her face hopeful. We need to talk, I said, sitting across from her. She closed the album, her expression turning serious. Okay. I held up Amy's phone, the text still on the screen. Why did you send this to her? Marie's face fell. I wanted her to know how sorry I am. I don't want her to hate me. You can't make this about her, I said firmly. She's dealing with enough as it is. This is between you and me, Marie. Not her. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. That's the problem, I said. You didn't think when you started this affair, and you're not thinking now. You keep trying to patch things up without addressing the damage you've done. Marie broke down, sobbing into her hands. I don't know what else to do, Brad. I don't know how to fix this. I sat back, the weight of her words sinking in. She didn't know how to fix it, and neither did I. For all her efforts, all her remorse, the cracks in our foundation were too deep to mend with apologies. That night, I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The decision I'd been avoiding was no longer something I could put off. It was time to face the truth for my sake, for Amy's, and even for Marie's. The end was coming. I just had to decide how it would look. The morning I made my decision, the house was quiet. Amy had left early to meet a friend, and Marie was still asleep. I sat in the kitchen, sipping coffee and staring out the window at the backyard. Memories flooded my mind. Family barbecues, Amy's birthday parties, lazy Sunday mornings with Marie laughing at my bad jokes. This house, this life, had been my everything. And now it felt like a stranger's home. When Marie finally came downstairs, she stopped in the doorway, like she could sense something was different. Morning, she said cautiously. Good morning, I replied, my voice steady. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from me, waiting. We need to talk, I said, breaking the silence. Her face paled, but she nodded. Okay. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. I've thought about everything, about us, about Amy, about what's left of this marriage. And I've come to a decision. Marie's hands tightened around her mug. Brad, please. Let me finish, I said gently. You've made it clear that you're sorry, that you want to fix things. And I believe you're sincere. But I can't ignore what you did, Marie. I can't forget the lies, the betrayal. Every time I look at you, I see what you took from me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she stayed silent. I've spent the last few weeks asking myself if there's anything left to save, I continued. And the truth is, I don't think there is. This marriage isn't just broken, it's shattered. And I don't think we can put it back together. Marie let out a shaky breath, tears streaming down her face. Is there really no chance? None at all. I shook my head, my voice soft but firm. I'm sorry. But no. She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. I sat there, watching the woman I once loved crumble, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or bitterness. Just sadness. I'll always care about you, Marie, I said. You're Amy's mother, and we'll always be connected because of her. But as a couple, we're done. Marie nodded through her tears, unable to speak. In the days that followed, I started making arrangements. I met with a lawyer, discussed custody and property division, and began looking for a new place to live. Marie and I agreed to keep things as civil as possible for Amy's sake, but the tension in the house was unbearable. When I told Amy, she hugged me tightly, her own tears falling freely. I'm proud of you, Dad, she said. You deserve to be happy. Hearing that gave me strength. The day I moved out, Marie stood by the door, watching as I loaded the last box into my car. She didn't say much, just a quiet, I'm sorry, before I drove away. It's been a few weeks now, and life is far from easy. I'm learning how to navigate a new normal, figuring out who I am outside of being Marie's husband. It's painful, but it's also freeing. Some days, I feel the weight of everything I've lost. But other days, I feel hope, the kind that tells me this isn't the end of my story. It's just the start of a new one. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe again.